This video will cover Al-Khalifa al-Rashidun, or the rightly guided caliphs, and it will also briefly touch on the roots of the Sunni-Shiite divide. My name's Patrick Riley. I'll be taking you through this, and my apologies in advance for mispronunciations. I'll try to do my best. So we'll start with the formation of the Caliphate. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, there was a need for someone to lead the Muslim people in his absence. This led to the formation of the idea of a caliph or leader, and Abu Bakr was chosen to be the first caliph, thus forming the Islamic Caliphate. The early caliphs continued the duties of the Prophet, namely providing sermons, leading Friday prayers, and leading the Islamic army. Their goal was to continue the work and ideals of Muhammad as closely to his teachings directly as they could, and they were largely helped by this via the Quran and the verbal traditions that had been handed down directly from the Prophet. So the first leader, as we mentioned, was Abu Bakr. He was known as Al-Siddiq, or the Truthful, by some. He ruled from 632 to 634, which was quite a short amount of time compared to the other caliphs, but we'll get to that later on. He lived a very modest life, traveling from his home to the capital of Medina on foot and not taking any pay for his position as caliph. Many of these prophets, you'll see, led a modest life and attempt to emulate the prophet's life, which was also very modest and respectful. He strove to continue the unity of the Ummah and advance the work of the Prophet Muhammad, and he maintained existing alliances and brought Central Arabia under the Muslim banner. He also helped to form the Islamic army and grew Muslim-held lands and continued an era of peace amongst the Arab tribes that had been created under the Prophet. He died in 634 due to an illness which cut his reign tragically short, as he was very well beloved by the people of Arabia. The second Islamic caliph was Umar bin al-Khattab. He was also known as Amir al-Mu'minin, or Commander of the Faithful. He ruled from 634 to 644, and he was seen as a man of justice as a result of his merciful treatment of the conquered. He brought the nations of Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt under Muslim control, and he helped to continue to transform the Arabs from a disjointed grouping of tribes to a singular, uniformly motivated body, known as the Ummah, under the Islamic Empire. He provided dhimmi, or protected status, to Jews and Christians living in the newly conquered nations. In other words, he allowed them to continue to practice their religion peacefully in exchange for acknowledging the empire and perhaps paying a small tithe or fine from time to time. This was strongly encouraged in the Quran, as the religions of Judaism and Christianity had been around in Arabia and the Middle East for quite some time and were widely respected due to their similarities to Islam. And of course, Islam states itself as a continuation of previous religions that expounds upon them. So moving forward, he allowed conquered nations to be controlled by natives in exchange for tribute, meaning that he did not install any new leaders, which was obviously very much respected by those nations and was looked fondly upon, given that invading bodies often install their own leaders. He also forbade Muslim soldiers from living amongst the conquered, instead having them reside in garrison towns known as Amsar. He believed that in doing this, he helped give a sense of humility to the soldiers and also respected the conquered people. He led a very simple life and is seen as the perfect representation of religious loyalty, honor, and humility. Similar to Abu Bakr, he was a very humble man. I believe it's said that he only owned one piece of clothing that he wore and slept on palm leaves. So many of these first leaders you'll see wanted to understand all of the people, and as such lived a pretty modest life. But unfortunately, despite all of these good things that he did, he was assassinated in 644 by a Persian man, thus cutting his reign short. So the third Islamic caliph was Uthman bin Affan. He ruled from 644 to 656. He was a wealthy merchant, but despite that, he donated quite a bit of his fortune to the Muslim people and to the religion. He led the Islamic army in the capture of Tripoli and Cyprus, and he created the Arab fleet, which saw an impressive victory over the Byzantines in 655. This strengthened the Islamic army and allowed them to further expand their empire. He angered some through his acts of nepotism, as he often placed members of his family in as governors of conquered areas. And this resulting tension that was formed led to a divide in the Muslim people, and Uthman was ultimately murdered, which led to a civil war amongst the Muslim people. After the death of Uthman, the position of caliph was left unfilled for several days, but eventually the fourth caliph was installed. Fourth caliph, my apologies. His name was Ali bin Abi Talib, and he was known as the Lion of God under Muhammad, supposedly. He ruled from 656 to 661, and he was the first cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, having married his daughter Fatima, and as such they had a very close relationship. Before his passing, of course. He was an impressive soldier, a skilled writer, and a skilled scholar, and his works are published in Naq al-Balagha, or the Peak of Eloquence. He saw a quick salvo of opposition from the previous caliph's relatives, and Aisha, the wife of Muhammad, obviously as a caliph that had promoted nepotism, the previous caliph's relatives likely expected to gain positions in government or even the caliphate directly, so they were not happy with his rule. As a result of some of these tensions, Ali moved the capital from Medina in Arabia to Kufa in Iraq. He faced opposition in Basra and replaced many of the leaders appointed under Uthman. And the former governor of Syria, Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan, refuted Ali's role as caliph and eventually led forces against him, which culminated in the Battle of Siffin in Raqqa. The battle ended in arbitration between both sides, and Ali agreed to uh, give the caliphate to Muawiyah. This was widely disliked by many of his followers, and some of them actually formed a faction that became known as the Kharijites, which stems from the verb kajara, to come out or to leave the hold. This group was extremely disappointed that he gave away the caliphate and believed that he was the rightful leader, not Muawiyah, my apologies. Shortly after the loss of the caliphate in 661, Ali was killed by one of the Kharijites in the new capital, Kufa. As a result of this betrayal and the many betrayals he faced from both allies and opposition, Ali is believed to be a symbol of the inherent injustice of life. Muslims who maintained loyalty to Ali became the Shiite Muslims, stemming from the word for partisan in Arabic. Under Muawiyah, the Islamic territories fell under the rule of the Umayyad dynasty, thus marking the end of the era of the rightly guided caliphs. So now we'll briefly touch on the formation of the Sunni and Shiite groups, which we already started to see a little bit with the fourth caliph. So the initial four caliphs followed Sunnah, which was the spoken tradition of Muhammad's statement and action, and followers of these ideals became known as the Sunni Muslims. So essentially the Sunnis were people who believed in the status quo and followed Islam, and as such, they represent the vast majority of the Muslim people, I believe accounting for about 85% of Muslims today. The Shiite sect has a much more complicated history. They were formed by those who remained loyal to the fourth caliph Ali bin Abi Talib, and they have often believed that him and his descendants are the true caliphs or imams of the Islamic empire. And the divide between the two groups was always strong, but it became much stronger after the killing of Hussein, who was the younger son of Ali. And the Shiites believed that he held the rightful claim to the caliphate after Muawiyah, as the elder son of Ali had been killed even after he agreed not to take place in the caliphate. But despite this, Hussein was not chosen as leader, and he led a group of soldiers to try to capture the caliphate for him and his followers, and was later brutally killed, as many of his followers were forced to back off. And as a result, there was an extreme increase in tension between the two groups. So the ultimate difference between the groups today is largely political in nature. Both groups closely follow the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad and the Caliphs. They believe in the same forms of prayer, the same pillars of Islam, but they mainly disagree in who should have led and who should lead the Islamic people. The Shiites believe that only direct descendants of Ali and the Prophet are fit to hold the title of Imam, and that they are the ultimate religious authority. As such, they believe in 12 Imams that are direct descendants, starting with Ali, then his eldest son, then his younger son Hussein, and moving down the line. The Sunnis believe that any religious authority can be Imam and that people should have a direct connection to God, while the Shiites believe in the Imam serving as a religious intermediary. So there's been a great deal of disagreement between the two groups, and as aforementioned, the Shiites have always been in the minority, and all of the imams that they've listed, save for Ali, never took the title of Caliph, and as a result, they've had to follow them in secret, and many times they're openly persecuted for believing in something different from the Sunnis. That is just a very brief touching on the Sunni Shiite divide. There are many more facts and pieces of history that explain the difference between the two groups. It would take dozens and dozens of slides to cover it. So hopefully this provides a brief insight into how the movement started. And if you'd like to know more, then you can continue to read Chapter 6 of the Introduction to Modern Arab Culture by Bassam Frangi, and hopefully that'll provide a little more insight into the movement. It's a very interesting struggle, and it still continues to this day, which represents the potency of the arguments between the two groups. Finally, the images in this presentation, as you can see here, all come from Bing under the Creative Commons license. They're meant to represent the four rightly guided caliphs, with each symbol being one representative of each caliph. My apologies if they're not accurate. I don't speak Arabic, so I can't verify, but they seem to be accurate. Anyways, thank you for sticking here so long. Listen to me ramble for this last bit. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about this topic and you're a little bit better prepared for the upcoming quiz and for the discussion. Thanks for staying here. Have a good one.